Welcome to the Deep Dive. It's great to have you with us today. We're going to dig into a whole stack of material you shared, all focusing on the latest from Apple, especially what came out of WWDC 2025, based on the reporting.
That's right. Yeah, we've looked through a lot of reports, different analyses, and even perspectives from developers who are, watching closely or actually there.
Okay.
So our goal today really is to unpack the key takeaways, kind of cut through the hype, the marketing noise, and figure out what these changes really mean.
Right. Like for the developers making the apps, for your experience using your iPhone or Mac, and also what's the bigger picture? Market reactions, global stuff.
Exactly. We want to get to the core insights about where Apple's heading with AI, user experience, the whole ecosystem, using what these sources tell us.
And a good starting point, it seems, is something the reports really hammered home. WWDC is fundamentally for the developers. Why is that so critical to understand up front?
Well, it really is the bedrock. I mean, Apple's whole world relies on that developer community. The App Store, it's not just, a shop. It's this huge source of innovation. And honestly, it's a big reason people stick with Apple devices. So keeping those developers happy, excited, engaged, that directly impacts the apps you get to use, makes your devices better.
Okay, so let's really zero in on that developer focus then. Sources are saying maybe the single most important piece of news for them is Apple finally opening up direct access to its own AI. Is that right? Like their large language model.
Yes, exactly. It's about letting third-party developers tap right into Apple's own foundation models, the stuff powering Apple Intelligence.
That sounds like a pretty big deal. How is it different from before?
It's a major shift. Before, developers might get, say, system features that used AI somewhere in the background, or maybe tools just available through the UI.
Okay.
But now, they can actually integrate Apple's on-device AI tech directly into their app's code. And Apple's really stressing the privacy and security angle, keeping a lot of it on your device.
So what does that actually let a developer do differently? One analysis called it a force multiplier.
Yeah, that force multiplier idea is a good way to put it.
Yeah.
It means developers can build AI features inside their apps using Apple's models. It's not just about, sticking a ChatGPT window in there.
Right.
It's about creating totally new capabilities that fit the app's specific purpose. Think about app intents. Developers are apparently working with these now to tell the OS what their app can do, integrating this new AI power.
Can you give an example, like what kind of feature?
Well, imagine maybe a drawing app that understands if you say, move the blue layer behind the red one. Or a note-taking app that can summarize based on the context of what's already in your notes within that app.
Ah, okay. So it makes the apps themselves smarter using Apple's tech.
Exactly. It lets even small indie developers add sophisticated AI layers they couldn't build themselves. It helps them stand out. And it basically gets the whole App Store ready for this AI shift using Apple's developer army, essentially.
And WWDC, it's more than just the big announcements on stage, right? The sources mention the human side is really important for developers.
Oh, absolutely. The networking aspect is huge. One developer perspective really highlighted meeting other indie devs, their heroes, sharing tips, even frustrations.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But maybe even more vital is getting access to Apple engineers. In the labs, they had them in person, but also lots of online sessions and group labs this year, too.
So developers can actually talk to the people who built the software.
Directly. Ask super specific technical questions. And it goes both ways. The engineers get crucial feedback. They see how their code gets used in, as one source put it, weird and wonderful ways by the community. That connection is gold for fixing bugs and planning future tools.
Sounds incredibly valuable. But even with this focus on developers, there was still some grumbling mentioned specifically about the small business program, the revenue share thing.
Yeah, that definitely surfaced as a pain point for some. I mean, the program itself is good in theory, right? It cuts Apple's commission from 30% down to 15% if you make under $1 million a year.
Which seems helpful for smaller developers.
It is, absolutely. That 15% instead of 30% makes a real difference for most small shops.
So what's the problem?
The issue described as not great in the sources is the jump. The second you make $1 over that $1 million mark, bang, you're back at 30% commission on everything going forward.
Wait, on everything, not just the amount over $1 million.
Right. And you also lose the 15% rate on that first $1 million for all future earnings, too. It's this really sudden, harsh cliff edge. It can massively hit your profits right when you're starting to scale. Kind of discourages growth right at that crucial point.
Ouch. Okay, I can see why that would be frustrating. All right, let's pivot now. Away from the developers, let's talk about the end user. What changes are we going to see? A lot seems to center on the look and feel, the interface.
Yeah, this is where things get very visible. Apple's rolling out a whole new design language called liquid glass. Reports describe it as really leaning into glassy looks, transparency, translucency throughout the interfaces.
Liquid glass sounds very Vision Pro-ish. Is that the idea?
That seems to be exactly the intention. The sources are clear. They want a unified look and feel across all the main operating systems. So iOS on your phone, macOS on your Mac, visionOS, watchOS, all getting this glassy makeover.
And they're calling this the biggest redesign since iOS 7. That was ages ago.
Yeah, about a decade. So it's not just, changing a few icons. It signals a pretty major visual overhaul is coming.
Why do such a big redesign now? What's the strategy behind it?
Well, multiple things. One, yeah, it gives everything a fresh coat of paint, feels modern. But strategically, it's about consistency.
Sure.
As you jump between your iPhone, your Mac, maybe your watch, or even a Vision Pro down the line, having that same visual language makes it easier. Less friction. It boosts that user stickiness, makes staying in the Apple ecosystem feel more seamless. But they'll try to do it without making it confusing to learn, hopefully.
And speaking of simplifying things for users, another change mentioned was the naming. Moving away from version numbers like iOS 18 to year numbers like iOS 26.
Yeah, this seems like a pretty practical move. I mean, who can keep track? Is my Mac on macOS 15 or 16? Is my phone iOS 18, which is the latest?
Sure.
Tying it to the year, like car models, a 2025 iPhone release running iOS 26 just makes it simpler for regular folks to know if all their Apple gear is on the current generation of software. Some sources even think it might allow for more smaller updates during the year, all under that main year banner.
Okay, beyond the look and the names, what about actual features powered by AI that people will notice?
Live translation was definitely highlighted. The report suggests it could pop up in iMessage calls, translating conversations in real time.
Wow.
And maybe even through AirPods, potentially translating speech around you. Now, the sources do point out competitors like Meta and Google have been working on translation for a while. So Apple might be seen as catching up here.
But still, having it built right into iMessage or potentially AirPods, that's pretty convenient, especially for bilingual users, as one source mentioned.
Totally. It's about bringing that utility natively into the ecosystem. Another thing mentioned was a beefed-up Shortcuts app. Using AI to make it way easier for you to create your own little automations and features, maybe just by describing what you want in plain English.
Interesting. So more power for users to customize things.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's really interesting how these big software changes like liquid glass seem connected to future hardware possibilities.
Yeah, there's definitely speculation there. That glassy, layered look of the software, it feels like it could be setting the stage for how future devices might look.
Like the mostly glass iPhone rumors. The iPhone 20 idea for the anniversary?
Exactly. That's the kind of thing referenced in the sources.
Yeah.
A mostly glass phone. Big design challenge for sure, but visually striking. And even sooner, these design ideas might show up in smaller ways on upcoming phones, like maybe redesigned bits on the iPhone 17 Pro this fall, according to some reports. Design changes often drive people to upgrade, so aligning software and future hardware makes sense.
Okay, let's zoom out again. The bigger picture.
Yeah.
How did the market react to all this WWDC news, and what other outside forces are playing a role here?
Well, the initial market reaction, if you look at the stock price, was actually a bit down. Apple stock dipped right after the keynote started.
Really? That seems odd with all the announcements. Any idea why?
The sources suggest maybe a couple of things. Could be a classic sell the news scenario. Expectations were super high, and a lot of this stuff, especially the developer AI access, had kind of been leaked or reported beforehand by people like Mark Gurman.
Ah, so it wasn't a total surprise to investors.
Potentially. Or maybe, linked to that, the really huge game-changing consumer AI features people were hoping for. Maybe they didn't feel like they fully landed yet. The feeling might be that the big Siri evolution or other major Apple Intelligence updates are still coming, maybe later in the year in software updates.
Which connects to that feeling also mentioned in the sources that maybe Apple is perceived as being a bit behind companies like Google or OpenAI on the pure AI tech right now?
Yeah, that perception is definitely out there and highlighted as a challenge. The analysis suggests a gap between the perceived substance of AI models from others versus Apple's current presentation. Even if Apple has a strong story about privacy and integration, there's this sense that the really mind-blowing AI experiences from Apple are still on the horizon, likely in those later updates.
Okay, moving beyond just the tech, what about those external factors? Trade issues, China?
That's still a really big question mark. The whole U.S.-China trade situation is constantly shifting. You hear about restrictions on high-tech stuff like advanced chips or jet engines, but it also involves materials crucial for phones, like rare earth magnets.
Right, things that Apple absolutely needs. So what's the potential direction there, according to the reporting?
It sounds like the thinking might be shifting towards more pointed and targeted restrictions, rather than just broad tariffs that hit everything. It's a tricky balance for the U.S. wanting to protect national security, but also needing access to China's huge market in innovation, what some analysts call China Alpha.
Okay.
And interestingly, the sources mention that China itself has been kind of breaking up its own tech giants like Alibaba and Tencent, separating their business lines. Paradoxically, that might actually make it easier for the U.S. to apply those targeted restrictions because the different parts of the companies are becoming more distinct.
Huh, that's an unexpected angle. So, with all this complexity, tariffs, AI race, how are analysts seeing Apple's overall position?
Despite all the uncertainty, the expectation cited in the sources is still for Apple to manage low single-digit growth this year. The Apple customer base seems really resilient. They weathered the pandemic better than many consumer goods sectors, for example.
But they still have that pricing problem in emerging markets, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. That's flagged as a major hurdle for capturing the next billion consumers. When you compare an iPhone price to what phones from Xiaomi or Oppo cost in places like India or parts of Southeast Asia, Apple is just priced significantly outside what many people can afford. Their high-end focus works great in established markets, but it limits broad expansion where price is the main factor.
Man, we've really gone from the nitty-gritty of developer APIs all the way to global trade policy. Okay, let's try to wrap this up. What are the absolute key takeaways from this deep dive?
Okay, first, Apple made a huge strategic bet on its developers, giving them direct private access to its core AI. That's fundamental for their ecosystem's future.
Right. Second, big interface changes are coming with liquid glass, aiming to make everything look and feel consistent across all your Apple devices, and maybe hinting at future hardware designs.
Third, they're adding important AI features users will see, like live translation, enhanced shortcuts, bringing utility into the native experience, even if they aren't always first globally with the concept.
Got it. And finally, market reactions were a bit muted, maybe because the biggest consumer AI splashes are still expected later, and those big external factors, especially trade tensions, are always hovering in the background.
Yeah, it really feels like while the most revolutionary AI stuff might be coming in phases, the groundwork laid now, developer access, the UI overhaul, specific features, these are really important foundational steps for Apple's direction.
Absolutely. Which kind of leads to a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over. Apple's strategy seems clear. Embed AI deeply, unify the experience across devices. So the question is, can the power of that integrated platform and their massive developer community overcome this perception of being behind in raw AI tech and navigate these tricky global trade issues to keep their dominant spot?
Definitely a lot to watch there.
Well, that's all the time we have for this deep dive. Thanks so much for joining us.